Hello, everybody. Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Robert Talisse.
I'm Scott Aikin.
These are 15-minute unscripted philosophy conversations between the two of us. We are the authors of Why We Argue and How We Should, A Guide to Political Disagreement. So, Aikin, I found myself recently in a conversation with a philosopher about a political philosophical issue, an issue in political philosophy, and my interlocutor had said, "Talisse, aren't you worried about an infinite regress?" And I said, since I share an office suite with Scott Aikin, since Scott Aikin is my neighbor in Furman Hall, I've become a lot less concerned about infinite regresses. Scott here is an infinitist. He's not bothered. He's not bothered by infinite regresses, at least when it comes to epistemic justification. What's up with that?
Yeah, right. So sorry for infecting you with that intellectual virus. Right. So what's infinitism? Why be an infinitist? So basically, the thought is. We'll just start with the thought that, look, if you're rational, you believe for reasons. Those reasons just can't be things that you snatched out of the air. You got to think of them as good reasons. You don't, again, just think of them as good reasons randomly. You presumably hold them for good reasons, and if you reflect on them, you can explain why those are good reasons. And the thought is that just doesn't seem to stop. It doesn't look like you can, at the very least, for any reason, just be able to say, that's a reason, and someone were to say, well, why do you believe that that's a good reason, or why do you think that that's true, or why do you think that even the truth of that makes that a good reason for something else? It looks like for you to be rational, you just don't get to say, so, or I don't know, or shrug your shoulders, or say duh back to them, or just raise your voice, or back of the hand. And so the infinitist view is that it's reasons all the way down. That the only way for us to be rational is for us to sort of possess our reasons in a way that if we were to reflect on them, we could think of another good reason for why that previous one was a good one. And so they've got to be, they can't go in a circle. It looks like that would beg the question. It doesn't look like they could ground out in something that you couldn't give another reason for. They could come in sort of big clouds that intersect and things like that. So epistemic infinitism is consistent with a number of other philosophical theories that allow for mutual justification or cross-justification, or even allows for there to be sort of non-inferential inputs. So, for example, experience. Infinitists can think that experience can give you reasons. You just have to be able to explain why. Right, that experience gives you a reason. And so as a consequence, the infinitist is a kind of, on the one hand, it's a kind of rationalism, and that reasons are the things that makes it such that rationality works. And it's consistent with actually a lot of philosophical theories about how justification works. So that's why to be an infinitist, that you might say, and it's a kind of an aspirational story too, right? That we want to have command of your intellectual life.
Is it a skeptical view?
Great. So
that's usually the pushback against infinitism, right? If you just say, not only that it's reasons all the way down, everybody holds that, right? It's that it's non-repeating, non-terminating reasons that keep on going.
That's right.
So why isn't that? Why does that just not lead us with the view that you're never justified in believing anything?
Right. So two quick things about that. One is to say that it's consistent with skepticism. That you can get a form of skepticism out of it, can or could. And so, but I don't see skepticism as a reductio. So I've, in some places, even said, look, the fact that a metaphilosophical theory, a theory about what the structure of justification has to be, doesn't get refuted by the fact that it has normative epistemic output that we don't like, right? It turns out that we know that if the structure of reasons has to be this way, and it turns out that we know a whole lot less than we would like to think that we do, that's not a reductio. That doesn't mean that it's false. It just means that we know a lot less. And so I've got kind of two thoughts on this. I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I'm what I call a crypto-skeptic. I think that skepticism is probably the consequence of infinitism. However, I have in other times thought, no, it looks like maybe we can, in a way, handle the reasons regress in the same way in which it looks like we can formulate an infinite, or at least an indefinite number. And no, there doesn't look like there's an upper limit of the number of English sentences, right? Once you've got competence, right, and a kind of a command of your language, there's no upper limit on the kinds of sentences that you can formulate. Once you've got a kind of competence with regards to your language, you can do that. And it turns out that it gets hard whenever you start talking about, whenever like any kid, like any 5-year-old can sort of feel like they can kind of put you to the wall with a couple why questions, right? But that's in some ways frustrating, but that's really a case where we just don't have a lot of practice at giving reasons. And it turns out that, doing philosophy makes you good at it.
Does infinitism entail any view about the given, or about what is sort of immediately sort of present in our cognitive lives? I mean, it seems that, well, a lot of philosophers have thought there are just there are things that look like they can play the role of regress stoppers because they're just brute.
Right. So you don't have to have the skepticism about the given to be an infinitist. And in fact, I think that there are givens. I think that there are brute surds that show up in our visual field, and that you might say are non-comparative, that we don't have to do inferential work to see them as them. We just have to do inferential work for them to be able to support other beliefs. So you might say, I'm experiencing thusly. Right. I don't need to have a whole lot of inferences to be justified in thinking that. I just have to have a lot of other inferences to be able to make it so that would be able to justify something else. So infinitism is consistent with givenism, and again, I think that it's consistent with a form of really modest foundationalism, but it doesn't have to entail a view about the given. You can be an anti-givenist, or you could be a givenist if you're an infinitist. I think that givenism helps with infinitism, because infinitisms have a number of problems with them, and I think that givenism solves some of them.
So here's the hard question, right? So
okay.
Does infinitism entail the aspirational? So you've got this right. Sort of inquirer, this sort of this striving upshot of infinitism. But why isn't it an apraxia worry? I mean, why is it just
right.
like, yeah, these justificatory chains are never going to be completed. So the difference between me stopping justification right here and me going on for another 20 years
right.
is, from the point of view of infinity.
Right.
It's kind of is negligible.
That's
so
right.
Why don't I just stop?
Why not stop here instead of right? So you might say. So let's make clear the apraxia
right.
worry to just make sure that to make sure that I'm clear about how to respond. So the apraxia worry is that if you've got an infinite series of reasons that you need to be able to traverse to be able to be justified. The thought is, well, inquiry is finite, right? You end up dying or having to go to bed or change your mind about something, and so you're only going to traverse a finite number of those reasons. And so, from the perspective of infinity, not traversing any of them would be effectively equivalent to traversing a lot of them.
Well, maybe it's not that extreme. But
okay.
Maybe. So maybe that there's no difference between 0 and 1,000.
And that's the difference, right?
I mean, what's the difference between 50 reasons and 5,000
right.
reasons?
Yeah,
I mean,
Right. Right. So on the one hand, the one answer is that we have. Let me make a distinction between the having the reasons that would be available counterfactually. So availability is something that we'd say something like, it's something that you could do, and the reasons could be there in the sense in which you could draw them out, like taking withdrawals from a bank. The other one is actually having them and giving them and thinking them out loud to yourself or saying them out loud to somebody else, and evaluating them. And those are two separate things, right? Those are two separate things. What you're talking about is, you might say, the dialectical elements. of infinitism. And I think that the dialectical elements of infinitism are ones that get drawn out and ones that actually get activated whenever we're in exchange with others. And so the reason why infinitism is in place is because it doesn't look like we have any dialectical ends to the reasons why we exchange, how we exchange. The only reason why we stop is because of the fact that we've resolved a disagreement.
I see.
And so the reason why we need to keep going, right, is so that whenever we have a disagreement, that we've completely fleshed it out, right? And so we get the spur of inquiry is the fact that we've disagreed or we have a kind of a question. So that's the reason why there's a difference, is that that you're sort of in some ways using each other to check each other's inferential chains.
Which might go a lot better if the interlocutor is herself not also an infinitist.
That's an interesting point. So a lot of people
let me spell that. So let me try to spell that out in the following way. I'm wondering if there isn't a potential for a pathological deployment of this.
Yes.
It's just we're all infinitists now, so there is no point at which we get to say the inquiry, we've solved our problem. The real problem is we're never justified.
Right.
That's a problem on your view that never gets solved.
Right.
So
we never know that we're justified.
That's
right.
There's no foot stomping. Well, I'm sorry. There's no place where it would be unreasonable on the infinitist view among two infinitists for someone to say, "Oh,
Okay,
wait a
well
minute, we
done.
can't stop here.
Yeah.
This is not a place to stop."
That's right. And I think that that's correct. I think that
Are you worried about sort of
I think that
pathological deployments of that? Just keeps the question. I can keep the question open.
Right. So I think that with regards to many of these, again, the pragmatics of asking questions helps with this, that we'd say we have, on the one hand, aspirational programs of just saying something like, look, I've identified a premise that we've assumed, right, where we want to be able to shore those up, versus someone saying, but you've assumed, I need to see right. It looks like those are two separate kinds of challenges. Right. And I think that in the former case, that's a case of, you might say, someone trying to play the devil's advocate or just identify blind spots where in our reasoning. And infinitism is sort of really keen on following those up. I think that, again, the pragmatics of reason exchange, and this is, again, the reason why I think that using dialogue norms for epistemic norms can sometimes yield strange results, right? Because it looks like in some ways, given what you had said, infinitism would be a sort of a picture of intellectual pathology, right? It would effectively just say something like, yeah, it doesn't look like we're ever even in a place where we can even come to any agreement that we can see as reasoned.
Or that the infinitist, among infinitists, any particular infinitist gets to, there's no principled way to prevent someone from delaying action or resolution,
right? Okay.
Simply because it always makes sense to say, well, wait a minute, this isn't done, right?
I think that's right. I think that
and sometimes you can accomplish a lot by just keeping a question open.
That's right. Now, I think that that's a place where we, again, need to be able to identify who has burdens of proof. And those are, again, practical reasons that constrain our conversations.
Well, that sounds good. Thanks, folks.